bad publishers, bad practices, bad games, and good advice. Cutting words. Hi folks, my name's Gheeotine, and I'm not okay. Unless you live under a rock, this last week in the US has been, let's charitably say, eventful. I don't say the following lines to be inflammatory. Now, I'm speaking from a strictly legal standpoint when I say that you could use the following words and have them not be considered defamatory to describe Donald Trump, and he's been elected as president again. Okay. But this is a gaming channel. I occasionally stray into political topics, but it's always couched with something to do with the hobby or industry of video gaming. That being said, much to the chagrin of my stomach lining, I pay enough attention to modern affairs to have a rough idea about how the future will unfold if certain stated intentions are followed through on. Now, I didn't like Kamala. In fact, my general policy on most, if not all, politicians is that you shouldn't like any of them, because it'll blind you to when they step out of line. But those who do pay attention to videos in my published library will likely know my stance on Trump. If not, here's a recap.
But I said I don't count that at the start of the video, and I don't trust game streaming because we live in America and our internet infrastructure is absolute dog. The Civil War was brought about because the South was afraid that the North was going to be taking away the peculiar institution of slavery. Quite frankly, I'd like to go to a bunch of corporate bigwigs, like the one that would price gouge insulin myself, and smack them upside the head with a guitar. I shifted priorities to try and encourage the simulated homeowners instead of the parasitic, ever-expanding landlord types. Assholes. Or idiots.
In spite of all that, I'm going to try and maintain a stance of objectivity. My analysis is admittedly speculation, but is based off either Trump's own words or actions from his last administration that would be considered relevant. All that being said, will Donald Trump's next presidency affect gamers, and if so, how? To give away the best possible scenarios up front, Trump and video gaming will be mostly isolated and independent from each other. He's not a gamer by any stretch of the imagination, he's only ever licensed out his likeness to a few titles, and to my knowledge, the only time he's ever directly referenced them was after one of America's many school spree shootings. In this case, the one at Parkland, Florida, where he attempted to pin blame on violent video games.
We have to do something about maybe what they're seeing and how they're seeing it, and also video games. I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts.
I've already covered that topic in another video, but to summarize, that argument isn't valid and is instead working backwards to obfuscate other factors. Besides, it's probably irrelevant now anyways. Following his public statements on violent video games, he had a meeting with various representatives from the games industry, and the subject became conspicuously absent from public discourse afterwards. Either the game industry representatives were able to thoroughly communicate that no, games don't cause violence, or the one I elect for, their lobbyists probably promised him hefty campaign contributions. Either way, the topic really hasn't been brought up by him much since. Actually, speaking of lobbyists and industry representatives, that could lead to one change that could be seen as good for executives and stockholders, but bad for gamers themselves. Trump's proven that he and his administration are very much against government regulation. With whispers not too long ago about the potential regulation of loot box and other Skinner-box gambling mechanics, it's possible that the major publishers of the industry, 2K, EA, Activision, etc., may try again on a few of those tactics, knowing that regulation is unlikely under his watch. Again, highly speculative, with the best case scenario being nothing changing for the average gamer. So let's move on to a topic with a bit more data for reference. For the uninitiated, tariffs are basically a tax on goods that the US imports that's paid by whatever company receiving it. So, for example, let's say a grocery store imports a banana. That banana has a 10% tariff and costs 10 cents to import. The grocer pays the government 1 cent, making the total cost 11 cents. Depending on the amount of room that the store has to profit from the banana, they may be able to charge the same, or they may have to raise the price of the banana to consumers to be able to keep selling bananas. Either the store takes a hit, or the consumer does. Trump has proposed an economic band-aid to levy tariffs on all imports, up to 60% on Chinese imported goods and up to 20% for imports from everywhere else. Microsoft's main Xbox manufacturing facility is in China. The assembly plants for Nintendo, Sony, and various high-end gaming PC components are dotted around East Asia. Assuming, for the sake of example, everything Trump said he'd do for tariffs comes true. While I couldn't find solid figures on the wholesale cost of an Xbox Series X, educated guesses put it around $400. With a 60% tariff, that goes up to about $640.
PowerColor, the company that manufactured my graphics card, the 7900 GRE, is based in Taiwan.
So let's estimate the production cost is around $300. Import costs would raise that to about $360.
Now I have a question for everyone here, and if your answer is yes, then I think you need to have a good, long sit down to think and look at the world that we live in. With any company with a for-profit goal, do you think that they will eat the expense over passing that expense onto the consumer?
Citing a BBC article during his last administration, Trump imposed a 50% tariff on just washing machines. As a consequence, consumers had to pay on average $86 more per unit and overall paid $1.5 billion more a year. Again, citing that BBC article, according to the Peterson Institute for International Economics, Trump's new proposed tariffs would effectively lower the incomes of the average American from 2 to 4%.
All I'll say here is if you were planning on getting a console or if you were planning on purchasing or upgrading a PC, now's probably the time to do it.
There is a potential silver lining, and please bear in mind that this is a big if this happens, then that might happen. The CHIPS Act, passed by the Biden administration, could encourage those same manufacturers to set up plants in the U.S. Quoting here, the CHIPS and Science Act provides $52.7 billion for American semiconductor research, development, manufacturing, and workforce development. Basically, it's a government incentive to try and bring high-end electronics manufacturing stateside. Companies could also potentially find an exploit similar to the auto industry. As an example, Ford trucks are mostly assembled overseas and then imported to an American factory where they have something small and rather insignificant like their grille attached before they are officially designated as made in the USA products. Just a little something to try and add a silver lining to the dark cloud approaching. Of an unrelated but still fiscal aspect, we need to talk about net neutrality, something that was done away with under Trump's last administration when he appointed Ajit Pai, former Verizon executive and winner of the Most Punchable Face of the Year award, to the head of the FCC. To educate some of you, net neutrality is the belief that the internet should have the same level of access across the board and not be regulated or varied depending on the website you visit. Say, for example, without net neutrality, if you wanted to change internet service and tried to search on your preferred browser for other providers, your current company might intentionally and legally throttle your speeds to a state of unusability, rendering you unable to easily research or pick another company. Another thing net neutrality prevents is internet providers treating your home network like that of the data you get on your cell phones. Without net neutrality, they could charge you for a base package that has 20 gigabytes a month of data, with other tiers of money and data depending on service. Do you download a lot of games or stream a lot of video? Well, then you'll want their Prime data package for 200 gigabytes of data a month for $180 with $1 a gig after that. Fortunately, the Biden administration put net neutrality back into effect in May of this past year, and many states adopted their own legislative net neutrality guarantees when the FCC originally overthrew it. Side note, if you want to read about some real cases of voter fraud, look into the case of the FCC polls asking if people wanted to get rid of it. Spoiler alert, real people didn't. So that's what I can determine might affect gamers from a fiscal aspect. But what about game developers? I think we can all agree that we appreciate the people who make the games that we play and enjoy on a daily basis. Well, it's worth noting that many game developers have been making a push for unionization and stronger labor rights, fighting for higher wages, better job security, and more comprehensive benefits. Trump is explicitly anti-union and anti-labor. Citing a list of first-hand accounts provided by the Communication Workers of America website, Trump has said in a live Twitter conversation with Elon Musk that all striking workers should be fired, stacked the National Labor Relations Board with anti-union appointees who overwhelmingly side with employers, threatened to veto legislation to raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour, and broke a previous campaign promise to take on companies that move jobs overseas, instead giving them $115 billion in contracts while still sending jobs offshore. So much for that CHIPS Act speculation. In my personal opinion, I think it should be criminal for a company like, say, for example, Activision, to report record-high revenue and then immediately follow that with layoffs for 8% of its staff, while the CEO takes home hundreds of millions of dollars. I highlight this because I support and wholeheartedly endorse the tweet that made the rounds a few years ago that says, "I want shorter games with worse graphics made by people who are paid more to work less, and I'm not kidding." I want developers to be properly compensated for the artwork that they create. I also believe that gameplay innovations and compelling stories interweaved into mechanics are a far more worthwhile endeavor than generating photorealistic hair follicles on generic shooter protagonist 8423. If the developers who make our games are suffering, then the quality of the games we receive also suffers. Now, there are several other worries and criticisms that I could make for the upcoming administration, from the financial to the social to the international, but those wouldn't really easily slot into topics suitable for a gaming channel. The big takeaway that may trigger the subset of people who scream to keep politics out of insert subject here is that everything is political. You don't have to like it, but that's our current reality. And if you say you're not political, then you've unwittingly chosen a side. The side that doesn't care to see anything change, and therefore, the side that says it's okay with whatever problems currently exist. My point is not to vilify those who voted for Trump. The way the mainstream media spreads information has unfortunately compromised media literacy for most of us. If anything, just try to not get locked into an echo chamber. And finally, on top of everything else, like my epic video, I hope I'm wrong. I don't want any of these predictions that I've made to come to pass. When we all do better, we all do better. But if people are suffering, I'm not happy about it, regardless of what side you're on. And that's why I'm making this video. I don't care about myself. I don't care if I get wealthy or rich or successful or anything along those lines. My general life philosophy is I'm going to take care of myself to the extent that I need to exist. And when my time comes, maybe I've made the world a better place, I hope. But that's it for today. So, if you'll excuse me, I don't know what comes next.